Welcome back to 50 Days to Rebuild, the series where I do 50 minutes of exercise and read 50 pages of a physio book in a day. This is day 11. Jumping into something cool on the exercise front, I jumped into the weird hip hinge exercise from Your Spine, Your Yoga, where you're basically sitting on top of your femurs, then bracing, and then trying to come back to sit on top of your heels, and then just repeating that cycle. At first, this felt okay, but I was starting to get some pain in my knees. But then I really worked on squeezing my butt throughout the motion, and that knee pain essentially vanished. And yeah, it felt like a nice motion. It felt cool to be trying to get some feeling of a hinge going. Following on with the rest of the leg portion of those exercises, tried to do some everted plantar flexion and inverted plantar flexion. That all went really quite well. I did still get some cracking in the right ankle, but when I actually increased the tension so that I could squeeze a bit harder, that cracking disappeared. So that was really quite promising, that I just need to be able to tense it harder to make that cracking just go away. Tib raises I also thought were a bit better. I again tried to do these inverted and everted just to test that out a bit, because I know previously when I did it inverted I was getting some better activations, and I feel like today I had some better range while doing that, so I was quite happy with that. Then coming into bench press, the thing that I've really been working on, had a bit of a mixed day today, so some good and some bad. The bad was it took some time to feel like it was getting right, but the good was that for the first time ever, I felt like I got my chest engaged. And that was so cool. I am noticing my elbows are like really wide, even though I'm upwardly rotating a bit when I'm holding the bar. I think I'm just grabbing the bar too wide to start with, because when I do it at my sides and I try and upwardly rotate, I still have like a better angle with my torso. So I think that might be part of why we had a bit of a good-bad relationship today, because my shoulder's starting to get a little angry at me, I think. And also, watching the bar path from the video yesterday, I was quite shocked, because I'm thinking this is vertical forearms, and they are anything but. I think that that's sort of part of what's happening here as well, is like it actually feels okay in the bottom range where I'm setting up this brace and this activation pattern, but as I'm pushing up, everything's going wrong, and I think a big part of that is just my forearms are not vertical. And again, also this upward rotation, I might be overdoing it a bit. That sensation's getting a little easier to chase, like by doing the armpits out cue that I said I was going to give a go. That did work better. But yeah, I think maybe it might have to start a bit narrower to begin, and then it might work a bit. But also, again, might just need to do some sort of like myofascial release, because things are definitely feeling very tight. Like there's not a lot of room for error here. Jumping into what I learned for the day, so I'm almost finished with Your Spine, Your Yoga, and I went through the whole thoracic spine section today, and a little bit of the cervical spine. With the T-spine, I was very intrigued to learn that the T-spine also doesn't really come into extension. It actually essentially just comes to be flat, and this was essentially the case with the lower back in flexion, that even though it might look bad when you really analyze it closely, it's like, oh, that's just flat. If that, it might not even reach flat. So that was quite cool. When we're moving about the thoracic spine, what we're seeing is that if you extend the spine, we're going to reduce our rotational capacity, whereas when we flex it, we're going to increase the rotational capacity, basically because we're not jamming the back of the vertebra. This was kind of similar to the lumbar spine, except the lumbar spine, you could flex or extend it and increase the rotation, but in the thoracic spine here, it's saying, nope, when we extend, that's just not going to happen. So yeah, I guess that has some good implications for trying to do some rotational work. Conversely, when we look at lateral flexions or side bending, it looks like the facet joints can asymmetrically limit that. So if you can bend more to one side than the other, you might have a difference in your actual facet joints just naturally, so that you are inhibited in how far you can go on one side compared to the other. So it's not necessarily like a muscular thing that's going wrong. Probably one of the cooler things I learned today was about some asymmetry when lifting one arm overhead. I touched on this somewhat in the previous video, but the author really expanded on this today, in that when you lift one arm overhead, you're going to have an ipsilateral lateral flexion and ipsilateral rotation. I know that's very jargon heavy. You're going to laterally flex and rotate to the same side as the arm that gets lifted up. That's very intriguing because I'm kind of trying to fight that when I'm doing exercises and trying to practice cueing. And this is just saying like that's going to happen if you're doing a unilateral movement. So that was just a nice relief because I always feel like I'm going a little insane when I'm trying to battle that movement. Playing into this whole thoracic region, there was a discussion around the intercostal muscles. These are muscles I'm quite familiar with already from my anatomical learnings and studies, but I hadn't heard of these functions before, which is a frustratingly common thing from my anatomy learnings. Gray's anatomy seems to have failed me, along with Ken Hub. But what the author argued here was that the intercostals, which are just muscles between the ribs, basically they contribute to rotation or even like preventing some of that rotation. So the external intercostals working with the external obliques would do contralateral rotation, so to the opposite side, whereas the internal intercostals and internal obliques would do ipsilateral rotation, so to the same side. Again, did not know that these contributed to rotation, and I find that interesting because they're very involved in breathing, but I've never really known what to do. Like, people talk about straining these muscles, and it's like, well, what do you do when they're strained? Like, how do you even move them except breathing? And it seems that rotation might be like an avenue if that happens. They also touched on hyperkyphosis, which is just a rounding forward. Lots of people have this because of the sort of slouched posture we have like a modern society. But I also know a lot of people with this, so it's quite intriguing to help others there. It's also called a dowager's hump, which is something that I've heard a friend of mine complain about for his neck and wanting to address his neck. And what they're arguing here is this is really just like extra flexion in the thorax. Now, you kind of want to correct that. It's not necessarily about like, let's try and just pull the neck back. It's like, let's pull the thoracic spine back and then the neck will come back. That's not to say that the thoracic spine is the causal point of this issue. It's just like there might be something else down the line that's doing this, but it's not trying to pull the neck back posturally. It's trying to pull the thoracic spine back. Okay, by far coolest thing learned, scoliosis. So I think I got diagnosed with a mild scoliosis when I was younger. I don't know. I don't even know if I still have it. But for anybody that does, this is fascinating as a way to treat it, which is to work unilaterally, which makes a lot of sense. So scoliosis is like a lateral bend. Apparently also there's some rotation that has to happen when you have that lateral bend and just in general when you side flex. So it's not exclusively that. But anyway, that's generally how it's considered. And if you do side planks on the side that is convex, so you strengthen that side, you can help reverse the scoliosis. So apparently there was this study, admittedly no control, that improved scoliosis, like the bend, so like brought it back to neutral by like 40%, which is ridiculous. And they even did it with double scoliosis. So it's like it bends this way and then it goes back and then it bends the other way again. Basically they did that with a side plank where they lifted the upper leg. So they just abducted it with a straight leg. That's just fascinating. Like, even if not for myself, just for other people, like that is so cool that we can address the orientation of the spine like that. The next portions were mainly around breathing, which is really quite fascinating. First thing is a term that I apparently used wrong, which is diaphragmatic breathing. I thought this was better than belly breathing because belly breathing might cue things wrong. But the author essentially says here, like, well, diaphragmatic breathing is what you're doing whenever you breathe. There's no way the diaphragm isn't working or you'd be suffocating. So fair point. And argues that some yoga practices have different ways of getting the belly breath to happen or different types of breathing to occur. So some practices use like a 3-stage breathing where it's like belly breath, which pushes the belly forward, and then there's breath to sort of get the ribs down, and then a third breath to sort of expand the chest. So it's interesting, they actually do want to expand the chest. Something that, like, for example, some chiros have told me not to do, but I think it's because they think I'm not expanding the belly, like, and I am. The reason I was intrigued by this, and it kind of runs counter to things I've heard, is that the reason I was told not to use belly breathing as a term was because when people belly breathe, they really just push forward and they kind of dump into like a hyperextension. And if I try and do what they say, which is push the belly forward, that's what happens. But if you do that secondary thing where you try and get the ribs to go like down and lateral, kind of corrects for it. I feel like the way that I have cued nowadays is probably simultaneously doing those last two steps. That's what pushing the fingers out and back is. Or maybe it's just doing step two, I don't know. But yeah, it was just interesting to hear there some different ways of practicing that. And the reason I was intrigued by the upper chest being expanded was it's made sense to me for some time to have not just intra-abdominal pressure, but intrathoracic pressure to stabilize that. Because intra-abdominal pressure stabilizes the low spine. Why would I not want to stabilize the upper spine? It's definitely more pressure, it could lead to more compression, but that's a worthwhile trait in the low spine, so why not apply it to the upper? This is something I haven't done for some time, but might be worth revisiting. I'm sort of opposed to any idea around aging. Maybe that's a fear of death, but also just that I think that most studies are flawed because most people aren't healthy, and even like a quote-unquote healthy individual, I think in a modern society is going to be an exceptionally rare person. And if you look at like information around like metabolic health, it's most definitely exceptionally rare, and I doubt that's actually the people that get involved in these studies. But that being said, as we age, yes, it tends to harden, but it's not every person, which sort of plays into my argument here. I think there's probably ways to avoid it. And that being said, the author talks about this exercise essentially you can run through to manage this, because we don't really lose our ability to inhale, we lose more of our ability to exhale, and then we're stuck in sort of this inhalation posture, which is kind of classic like short posture in like the upper back and neck, which is painful and also like unhealthy. Basically, we want to put our hands on our stomach and our sternum and then try and exhale and force the ribs down and pull back. So apparently this will help maintain that exhalation ability and then also not lose that elasticity in the cartilages. And then just covered a little bit around the neck. So looking at the vertebrae of the neck, they're really quite small. They're not really built for stability. They're built around mobility. Obviously, they have some stabilizing function, but just because they're so small, they can't do much for stability. So the argument here is that the ligaments, the fascia, and the muscles are the big stabilizers of the neck. And the reason I just want to bring this up is this plays into this idea I was so excited about yesterday, which is like, then surely we can move the spine. Like, this is evidence of it for the neck. Why not have the muscles, the fascia, the ligaments also be the stabilizers for, at least to some extent, for the thoracic, the lumbar, the sacral. I think that's at least maybe a little bit like somewhat evidence in that same direction. And the last just really weird piece of info that I learned today was that apparently the platysma myoids, very weird muscle, they're essentially embedded in the fascia from the pecs and the shoulders, come up into the like the bottom of the lip and the jaw, and they help depress the lower lip and I think the jaw as well. Supposedly that can help with breast sagging if you strengthen that muscle. Kind of makes sense based on its location. I have no idea how you strengthen that muscle beyond, I guess, clenching. It does pull up on it. The idea there was more that it could conceivably help. Whether or not it does or not, I don't know, but I just thought that was interesting. And yeah, that's essentially it for day 11. Happy to almost have finished this book. And yeah, if anyone's watching, thanks for watching and hope you have a good day.